So I want to tell a little story about an example of a microaggression that I enacted on somebody else. So I was part of this community writing class, and I was uh, talking to a classmate after class one night, and this classmate's a person who, pretty much everyone who was there identified themselves somewhere as a part of the LGBTQ community. And this particular person is someone who would be considered a person of color in our society. And I definitely have white privilege in this situation. And I'm talking to them, and we're just chatting about something. I think it was something maybe that had happened at work. And I was feeling really frustrated about a situation. And I was looking for words to say, and and I was just trying to express like how frustrated I was feeling about a situation. And I said, and it was just, oh, it's just so lame. And that phrase, to many people, like, oh, that doesn't mean anything, but but there was something in this moment when I was talking to this person when, like, as soon as the words crossed my lips, I saw this sort of cloud go across their eyes. And I knew instantly, like, oh, like that's something, as someone who's able-bodied, I've never had that word used against me. Used as a way of saying my body doesn't fit the norms of what's expected in society. That word hasn't been used to oppress me, and so it just came right out of my mouth without any cost. And I didn't, like, I saw that it had happened, and it clicked in my head. And the other person, like, they're an able-bodied person as well, um, but they were a little bit more aware of that. And so in this moment where I have I have privilege in that interaction because of my whiteness, my cisgendered maleness, um, that I clearly have privilege here, and I've just demonstrated as I'm talking to someone um, that I'm not necessarily a safe person, because there's this other aspect of my privilege that I'm not really interacting with in a critical way. And it was something that I was like, oh, I see here the message that I sent in that moment was that I'm not a safe person to talk to. I see this happen also with another word that's really popular to use in our society, and that's the word crazy. This word has been used so oppressively against so many people, and yet for people who haven't had the experience of being called that word, they toss it around. You know, we toss it around as if it were a really easy word, but it's not for a lot of people. And so, what I'd hope is that as we begin to build our awareness that we're communicating something when we say these things, when we do these things, that we would begin to pay attention. Particularly, I think this is important to think about, like, it's important for all people, but I think it's really important to think about what it means when someone who's like a teacher or a parent or a pastor or a coach, a doctor, a therapist, when you have like bosses or significant others who are communicating to people, I'm not safe to talk to about tough things. That's a big deal. Like, that sends a really strong and painful message to people. And so particularly, people who are caregivers, or who are supposed to be in helping professions, or parents, like, when you communicate these things through microaggressions, that can be really damaging. So I want to shift now and talk about, physically and mentally, what is it that a microaggression does? I think the first thing is, I've talked a little bit about a microaggression makes me feel unsafe when I experience a microaggression. Typically it makes me want to hide, to be silent, or to disappear. Sometimes it makes me angry, but sometimes it's not safe in that moment to express the anger that I feel. So when, particularly in those situations where someone's asking me to participate with them in upholding a dynamic of privilege that's being used against me, when I'm asked to justify my existence in the world, that makes me really angry, but I have to make a choice in that moment of, if I express my anger, what will be the cost? Am I putting myself in risk of physical harm? Or if I express my anger, do they have enough privilege that they will just be able to walk away and cut off relationship with me, and in a way that's going to cost me down the road if I need this to have access to things in society, or in an organization, or at school, or whatever the dynamic might be for someone. You have to weigh those choices. Physically, there are studies that have been done that show that these sorts of microaggressions they are traumatic events to our bodies, and they cumulatively over time increase our cortisol levels. They increase our stress chemicals, the stress hormones in our body stay elevated over longer periods of time. This is why populations who experience oppression tend to have higher levels of depression, of suicide risk, of heart failures, and arterial, like high blood pressure, cholesterol, those sorts of health problems that are directly impacted by stress on the body. It drives up adrenaline. It can trigger depression and addictive kinds of coping behaviors, like soothing myself, calming myself down through overeating or drinking too much alcohol, or over exercising, like these sorts of ways of trying to regulate our bodies to cope with the massive amounts of stress. One of the biggest things mentally and physically is that microaggressions isolate you, both by making you feel alone and by sort of cutting you off from safe people. And so that isolation is really harmful, especially for young people, but for everyone, really. And then one of the things that long-term has a really big impact is that microaggressions make me question my own experience of the situation, of my body, and of the world. And this is just this really detrimental dynamic that plays out with microaggressions over time. I start to question the reality of what I'm experiencing, because I'm told that the reality that someone else is living in a position of privilege is what's normal, and that I'm not okay. And so now for the most important part of the video, I hope that, hopefully you've stayed tuned through all that. It's a bunny rabbit!